Hi, this is David Thompson with part 2 of the overview series, the walkthrough series for Pavlov's house. So in the first video we talked about how to set up the game, gave a brief overview of the turn structure and the phases, and a little bit of information about the modes of play. So in this video I'm really going to concentrate just on the operational level Soviet actions that occur in the first phase of the game, the Soviet card phase. So I mentioned in the last video that the way this plays out is you draw 4 cards from the Soviet card deck and you take 3 actions with those, 1 action from each of 3 different cards. I should mention that this deck has 28 action cards in it, and then in addition to that you start with 3 Fog of War cards mixed in and then 4 Fog of War cards outside of the deck. And there's ways to obviously add Fog of War to the deck and also remove it. But for now, we're just going to concentrate on walking through the different actions of the game. So I've taken 4 different example cards. Each card in the deck is unique, so there's no repetition in the combination of actions on any of the cards. And so we're just going to walk through each of the 8 different actions. So the first one we'll look at is the 62nd Guards Army Command Post. And one thing I should mention is that almost all of these cards has some ability to recover. And what that means is, let's say there's a disrupted token on the location that's associated with the card. So in this case, we have the command post for the 62nd Army. We can always take that action to recover or remove a disrupted token. And most of these cards can do that. So I probably won't repeat myself as we go through those cards. Just note that that's a common action across most of the cards and most of the actions. The other thing that the 62nd Guards Army Command Post can do is be used to resupply the staging area. So you can go into the different various supplies that the 62nd Army has access to, and you can take any combination of 5 of those. So we're going to use that action, for example, to load the staging area with this. Now, one thing I should mention is if the location is disrupted, typically that denies you from the ability of using any action other than removing it. So had this position been disrupted at the beginning of the turn, we could not take the action to load supplies here. We'd have to first remove the token. Okay, so that's the 62nd Army. The next is the Volga military flotilla. So we have 3 spaces associated with it here. You can use this action to load up supplies. So we could load any combination of supplies onto any space that's not disrupted. So for example, if this space was disrupted, we could take this action to load 2 supplies. Just like the command post, you could take this action instead to remove the disruption. But we're gonna say that the situation was this, that they were all empty and we've loaded 3 supplies. The other thing that the Volga military flotilla can do is take an action if these were already loaded to move them into the supplies area of Pavlov's house. So we're just gonna do that. So it can do either one of those actions. Okay, next up is the 13th Guards Rifle Division Command Post. So that's represented on the board by this position. Again, if it has a disrupted token, you can spend an action to recover it. And if it has a disrupted token, you can take no other action. So other than that, the primary action that this is going to be associated with is reinforcing Pavlov's house with new troops. So when you use this action, you get 6 points worth of troops. And what does that mean? Those points correlate to these dots on the counters. Each dot is a point, and you have 6 points to spend in any way you want across all the counters. So, for example, let's say you wanted to bring in the sniper, 6 points. You would be spending all of them. Alternatively, maybe we want to bring in this leader of a machine gun unit, another machine gunner, and a machine gun itself. That would be 6 points. And so, for example, we'll just say we're going to do that. You take those and you place them into the reserves location in Pavlov's house. Okay. Next up is the Sapper. So we can do a couple of different things with the Sapper. There's no position here. Instead, it's the only position that's actually in the Wehrmacht assault or German assault area. So you can see positions here. The way you use the Sapper is you have to get the Sapper token into the staging area, then load it into the flotilla, to deliver it to the supplies area. Once it's there, the Sapper can do one of 2 different things. Either you can position it here for an action on any of these spaces, or you can spend it, and we go back to the stock, to increase the defense value of one of the 3 walls in Pavlov's house. So we'll say that we're going to place it here. And these are the field defenses. So what we're representing here is that they're placing mines or barbed wire, so anti-personnel or anti-armor defenses. Once the token's here, if the Wehrmacht were to advance along this path and move forward, you would spend the Sapper token. You don't have an option. You have to spend it. It gets sent back to the supply. In the German unit that advanced, you will roll 3 dice against it, against the armor value. So in this case, the rifleman has an armor value of 4. You would roll 3 dice, and if any of those dice is equal to or higher than 4, that unit is discarded from the game. Okay, next up is the artillery. So it correlates to these 2 spaces on the board. Again, if it's disrupted, you can't place a token here. You have to remove the disruption token before you can place an artillery token here. So what the artillery does is all you're doing is basically putting a token there, waiting for a forward observer in Pavlov's house to use it. So we'll talk about that later in the tactical phase 3, the Soviet counter phase, where we talk about calling in artillery. But for our purposes, in this phase, all we're doing is placing a token here to get it ready. Similarly, the air defense tokens, so you can see there's 2 different ones, the 267th and the 1083rd. As far as actions, they work exactly the same. The only difference is the position. So you would put the token based on the action in either location. So you take the action to place the token, and the actual token is used in the Wehrmacht phase when Stukas are attacking. You can spend the tokens to defend against that. And again, we'll talk about that later. So then the last action is the signal battalion. So there's 4 positions associated with the signal battalion. If they're disrupted, this is a little bit different than some of the other disruptions. If these spaces receive a disruption, meaning they've been attacked by Stukas, not only do you place the token here, but you take a fog of war and add it to the deck. So by cutting the line of communication, you're adding fog of war to your deck, and you're making it more difficult to take actions, operational actions. So again, you can take an action to remove the disruption. You can take an action to place these tokens. The other thing you can do is use an action by the signal battalion if you have a fog of war card in your draw. So let's say this was your draw. You could spin this card to remove this fog of war permanently from your deck. I say permanently unless it was to come back in through being disrupted. And then draw a new card that you could then take an action with. So this for example, is unfortunate. We drew a fog of war to replace it. But let's just say we had drawn this card. Now, this still counts as one of your actions, so you still only have 2 actions left, but you now get to get rid of that fog of war, remove it from your deck, and have some additional options. The last thing that the signal battalion can do is, in the event that you're able to get all 4 signal battalion tokens on the board, which is not easy, but if you do it, if they are all in place at the beginning of your turn, you're able to take 4 actions instead of 3. So it's very powerful. It's extremely helpful if you can take 4 actions every turn instead of 3, but it's also very difficult to achieve. So that's an overview of all the different actions we take. There's a couple there that, as I mentioned, we'll talk about in more detail later as they relate to different parts of the board. But in general, that's a review. So until next time, thanks for watching.